The role of language in shaping the performing arts. So, how has Tamil and Sanskrit been a part of the performing art traditions? And then I will delve into the mārga deśi confluence, the mārga deśi interaction that is happening. And I will go one by one. First, I will be talking about the deśi influencing the mārga, and then the backflow. So this is the map of Kerala. So there are certain performing arts that are specific, and they are famous, and they are performed only in certain parts of Kerala. For example, Teyyam is more famous in the northern part of Kerala, while the others are more, they are spread across the different parts of Kerala with certain variations, right? Certain differences. So before I delve into the different nomenclatures and different art forms, I would like to assert that there are certain art forms that you would be aware of, right? And there are certain nomenclatures that you would be aware of, say classical arts or folk arts, ritual arts. But as I proceed, you will have to understand, and you will have to gather how there is always an interaction, and how these nomenclatures are quite fluid in nature. You know, in praxis, all of these nomenclatures are quite fluid in nature. So, firstly, we'll talk about the classical art forms in Kerala. They are Koodiyattam. So it is believed that it is about 1500 to 2000 years old, and it was codified around the 11th century by the Chera king Kulashekara Varma. And the plays, the stories that are depicted are majorly taken from the Sanskrit plays, and it is in as mentioned, it is in Sanskrit, and the dialogues are rendered in Prakrit, Manipravalam, Malayalam, and there is also this addition of Tamil that we'll be looking at in a few minutes. Then we have Kathakali and Krishnanatam, which are actually contemporary to each other. They emerged in around the 17th century, and Krishnatam was actually the Krishnatam came as it was written by the Chera king Manaveda, and it was influenced. It was influenced by the Bhagavata Purana, and he wrote the Krishna Giti. Right? The verses are written into Krishna Giti, and then there is Mohiniyattam that also took prominence around this time. Then we have the ritual arts, right? And most of these ritual arts are based in the Devi temples. They are performed as an homage to the Bhagavati figure, the Devi. Towards the end, as you see, Ayyappan Tiyata and Ayyappan Pata is they are actually performed in homage to Ayyappan, Lord Ayyappan. Right, then there is Sarpam Pata, which is for the serpent worship, during the serpent worship. And now, what I would like to clarify here is that all of these ritual arts are not only showing or not only performing music, but they are also showcasing performance. I mean, there is drama, there is dance, nrittam and natyam. And there is also fine arts. There is also this Kala-eidoscope which is there. So if you see Mudiyattam, which we'll be talking in a while, and also Sarpa Pata, therein we also find this Rangoli making which is there, and which is considered as part of that entire ritual. Right, and then there is Margam Kali, which is a part of the Christian community. It is the performing art of the Christian community in Kerala. Daffamutta and Arbanamutta are the performing arts of the Muslim community. Right. Then we have the folk arts, which actually range from, the purpose of performance actually ranges from, say, begetting children, fertility, marriages. Say, for example, Oppana is performed. It's a performing art of the Muslim community, and it is performed during the marriage ceremony. Right, and then so there are a whole lot of reasons, or some of them are presented in front of the seniors of a community. Right, so several there are various purposes and various ways in which these are performed. So before delving into the next section, which is about language, so I would like to clarify that there was influence of Tamil, right? There was also influences of the Sanskrit traditions, Sanskrit, right? The Purana story, the Puranic stories, so on and so forth. There was also the influence of the trader settlements, the trade settlements that happened in Kerala. So, and we'll see that, how performing arts actually were created, and then they were, the presentation was enmeshed with the language, or the Persian language, or Syriac language, so on and so forth. So firstly, we look at early Tamil poetry, where we find the mention of the murag, right? And this is coming from a very seminal essay by Kailasapati, and he's talking about the bards and bardic traditions, and how these minstrels were actually carrying the pot-shaped, medium-sized murag, right? And when we see it today, even today, Koodiyattam makes use of the mīrāva, which is called the mīrāva, the pod-shaped percussion instrument. Not just that, the Nambiars are actually the traditional instrumentalists of the mīrāva, and they actually have these verses which are in Tamil, and this is called the Nambiyar Tamil, right? And it shows how there has been an influence of the Tamil language, right? Then we have the mention of the Uluvans, or the respected poets, right? So and this is not only coming out of K. Kailasapati's essay, but also Stuart Blackburn, a scholar, who was talking about how how Tamil literature, and especially Kampan Ramayana, had traveled from Tamil Nadu via the Palakkad Pass to Kerala, and how these Pulluvans were actually had this talent of poetry and the Vachika Abhinaya, which is actually how it is rendered, the dialogues are rendered. So, and it's very interesting to note that it's not just shadow puppetry, which is Tolpava, is not just famous in Kerala, but also in Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and all of these places. So that's how that the traveling is happening, right? Next, we move on to Sanskrit and Sanskritic traditions. So, as I mentioned, in the 11th century, the Chera king Kulashekara Varma, he codifies Koodiyattam, and he writes the plays. He writes the plays which are based on the Mahabharata. It's Subhadra Dhananjayan and Tapati Samvarman. And it's interesting that when the Trivandrum plays were discovered, and which were ascribed to Bhasa in early 20th century, it was noted that these plays were actually in practice and in performance by the Chakyar community. They were actually performing these without the knowledge of such a play existing in the Sanskrit language, right? So, and this is where it is important to note what we were talking about, or what we were discussing in Professor Srinivas Reddy's class. That he did mention, what comes first, the theory or practice, and it's very important to understand that the praxis was still living, whereas the plays were nowhere to be seen at that time, right? So. And then we also have the Krishna Giti, as I had mentioned, Krishna Giti, which was influenced by Bhagavata Purana, the Skanda 10th and 11th of the Bhagavata Purana. And it was written by King Manaveda in 17th century. Similarly, Krishnanatam, the contemporary, is Ramanatam, which later was called Kadagali. And the stories, as it is clear, were the stories of Rama, right? So we have that influence of the Sanskrit traditions here, right? So now we delve into the Mārga deśi confluence, and first we look at how the deśi is influencing the Mārga. There's a quote by Kapila Vatsyayan, and it is very important to understand this, the transition that is happening from the Bhagavati and the Devi cult tradition, right? The ritual tradition to the tradition of Kadagali, or the performance of Kadagali, Koodiyattam, and all of these. And how is that transition happening in the kind of stories that are depicted, in the kind of elements that are put forth, and what kind of staging is done, right? And this quote is very important. The evolution, she says, the evolution of Krishnanatam and Kadagali has significance beyond the legendary stories of Manavedan, the Zamorines of Calicut, and the Rajas of Kottarakara. Indeed, it would appear that apart from dreams and visions, the creators of these forms were conscious of the fact that the introduction of new themes and literary content could or would receive acceptance and legitimacy only if other, more popular forms were adopted. And we see this adoption and incorporation of the deśi elements in the Mārga tradition, and this is what we are about to look at. Right. So this is actually a mask in Teyyam. Teyyam is an art form. It's a folk ritual art, and it is famous in northern Kerala, especially in Kannur district. And we see a very similar, this kind of a similarity in the masks that are seen in Krishnanatam. And Krishnanatam is the only classical art form where masks are created. In other art forms like Koodiyattam and Kadagali, we see even in Mohiniyattam, we see most of face painting rather than the actual masks being used, right? Next is, so we see this picture. This picture is, this is another Teyyam, and Teyyam performer who is actually blessing a devotee after a performance. So we look at the purpose of performing a Teyyam, and it is about begetting children, winning of lawsuits, warding off evil, getting rid of epidemics. And Krishnatam also has a very similar purpose of being performed, right? And it's very interesting to know that when I was in conversation with K. Sugumaran Ashan, as a guru of Krishnanatam, he said that there were several politicians who had come and offered to perform, or they offered the performance of Bhanayuddham, for example, and so on and so forth, and they miraculously were victorious after the performance commenced and was over. And there are several, the story of say the story of Krishna Jananam is for begetting children, or Swayamvaram for people who have delayed marriages, for example. So there is this purpose of of performance, right, which is seen across deśi and mārga traditions. So this is another ritual form. This is Mudiyetta, right? And this is the story of this is the story where there is a battle between battle of Dwarika and the Devi figure, right? And so we see how there is the makeup. You have to look at the makeup here, right? It's a folk form, and here we have a very similar way of putting the dots around the eyes in Koodiyattam, right? Now, so before I move any further, I would like to make it clear that when I am looking at mārga and deśi and all of this interplay, I'm looking at I'm primarily looking at Abhinaya, right? And this is something that comes up in Natya Shastra. And under Abhinaya, we have four kinds of Abhinayas. We have Sattvika Abhinaya, which is emotion and bhava and how it is rendered and how it is performed. There is Aharya Abhinaya, which is about costuming, right? Which is about stage settings. The third is Angika Abhinaya, which is movement, right? The body movement, the hand gestures, mudras. And then there is Vachika Abhinaya, which is about how the dialogues are being rendered, what kind of language each character is utilizing, which kind of language, right? What language, say, royals are using Sanskrit or others are using Prakrits or, so on and so forth. So this is part of Aharya Abhinaya that I was talking about, the masks, for example. Here we have the curtains, right? So this is one kind of curtain, and we see a very similar kind of curtain being used, and this is called the Yavanika in Koodiyattam, right? And the Tirashila in Kathakali. Very, very similar. Also the placement of the lamp, as you can see. Another thing is the presence of the fool, right? The fool figure, the clown figure. It's not only prevalent in the in Shakespearean plays, but also in the Indian context here. So we have as I was mentioning, it is a battle between Dwarika and Devi. So Cooley is coming as a clown figure who's always going around with Devi and providing a comic relief in the scene of the battle. A very similar thing is found in the Sanskrit plays in Koodiyattam. We see the Vidushaka, right? Now, here I would like to clarify that we do not know when Mudiyetta came into existence, right? And which art form took from another. But what is significant is that there is this dialogue that is happening, right? We find very similar elements in totally different kind of art forms, right? Now we come to the impact, the backflow, the how mārga, the impact of mārga is happening on the deśi forms. Here Padma Subramaniam writes, though basically the whole of South India is soaked in the graceful style, Kerala alone seems to have inherited a combination of the graceful activity of the body and the forceful activity of the body, right? Probably because of the influence of their peculiar passion for the martial arts like Kala-eidoscope. Moreover, their faith seen in the spontaneous dances under the spell of dead souls, as I was mentioning, the ritual arts, with intense tantric practices have given a definite character of Arabati even in their Kaishiki based forms. Right, and this is actually coming from the Natya Shastra. We had spoken about all of these, we had seen all of these terms coming up in Padma Subramanian's lecture in this edition. And she mentions that she's arguing that the forceful activity of the body is something which is very peculiar to Kerala. There are definitely Kaishiki styles. You have Mohiniyattam, you have the Lasya, the flowy kind of dance forms, but there are also this forceful activity, and we'll be looking at that in the further performing arts that we'll be looking at, the pictures that we'll be looking at. So this is Nangiarkoothu, which is depicting the story of Kovalan and Kannagi, right? And they also have this influence in the language in which it is rendered. There is influence of Malayalam as well as Old Malayalam as well as Tamil. Okay. Another is how Vachika Abhinaya becomes very significant in Tolpavaku. Right, so they are only using shadow puppetry. I mean, and the story is very beautiful. The story is that the legend behind this, the lore behind this, is that during the Rama Ravana battle, there is also Devi who's killing Mahishasura, and while she is engaged in killing Mahishasura, she misses out on the battle of Rama Ravana Yuddha. The Rama Ravana, and when she comes back, she is not able. Everybody is in praise of Rama, and she doesn't understand. She says that I missed watching it, and she complains it to Shiva, and it is because of that this art form, with special reference, with special importance to the battle scene, is performed in front of the Devi temples, facing the sanctum sanctorum. The playhouses are in, they are facing the sanctum sanctorum where the Devi can actually watch this performance. We also look at how music has been shifting, and how music, the Kerala classical music has been shifting, and it has been part of both folk and classical art forms in Kerala. So Sopana Sangeetam, Sopana means the staircase, just outside the Sanctum Sanctorum. So the songs are rendered, the songs are sung there at the Sopanam, and that is why they are called Sopana Sangeetam. And we find them in the performance of Kathakali. We also find it in Koodiyattam, right? We find the use of Edekya in Koodiyattam. Now, the interesting fact is that Edekya was actually not a part of the Koodiyattam tradition, or it was only Miravu which was accompanying a Koodiyattam performer. It was later that the Edekya was incorporated into the Koodiyattam performance. And even when it was incorporated, it was the performer, the Edekya performer, will not be standing next to the Miravu performers, right? So they will be far towards, they will be standing far away. It was later on that other wind instruments like the Kuram Kural was done away with, and Edekya was included in the Koodiyattam performances. The same with Mohiniyattam, and we see the use of Edekya in Mohiniyattam. We see that we see the use of Chenda in Kathakali and Mudiyettu also, right? This is a very interesting art form. This is called Ottantulal, and when I was actually preparing for my thesis as well as for this lecture, I was very curious to know where I should place Ottantulal, and even artists in Kerala were quite confused where, because is it folk, is it classical, or is it semi-classical? I would like to And then we came into a consensus that we'll call it a semi-classical form. Now it is very interesting because it emerges in the 18th century, and Kunjan Nambiar is believed to be the one who came up with Otanthulal. And the story goes like that he is a Nambiar, as I had mentioned, that he was playing the Miraga. What happens is that he dozes off when a Chakyarkooth, the performer, Chakyarkooth is a solo art form of Koodiyattam. So a Chakyarkooth is going on, right? And the Nambiar, Kunjan Nambiar, he falls asleep. He dozes off. What happens is the Chakyar actually is enraged, right? He's enraged. Now, very interesting is that Chakyarkooth itself is an art form that satirizes situations, it satirizes people, it satirizes people from the audience. Okay, and there have been anecdotes about how kings and officials, chieftains were actually mocked at by this Chakyar. And now what happens in the 18th century is that there is another art form that mocks this particular art, this particular art form, right? It's very interesting. And when we look at it, and when we look at the Aharya Abhinaya, when we look at the Vachika Abhinaya, which is very prominent in Otanthulal, the Vachika Abhinaya is prominent. We see an aspect of Kathakali, of how the green color is very prominent, and which is seen in other art forms like Koodiyattam and Kathakali. Also the hand gestures, right? The mudras are very similar, and also the leg movement, right? The body movement. So we have Aharya Abhinaya, we have Vachika Abhinaya, and we have Angika Abhinaya, which is not completely completely similar to the classical arts, but definitely there is a heavy influence from these art forms, right? Next we have Bharatanatyam. Now this is very interesting for me because this actually takes me back to the quote that I was talking about uh, in Kapila Vatsyayana, that particular quote. And this art form actually is helping us understand the transition of it, or not just the not the transition exactly, but a blend of both these, the Devi cult and the Sanskritic traditions at the classical art forms that we are looking at. Because the story is very important here. The Lord was like, so there was Arjuna after the Mahabharata war. He doesn't want to be part of the human sacrifice. So Devi is about to put him through that human sacrifice, and he does not want that. And for her, he tries to dance for her and appease her. And this is exactly what it is. It is the Arjuna Nrittam in front of Devi, right? So it is connecting that story, that Mahabharata story, to the Devi cult, and that is why the blend is so important. Not just that, if we look at the attire, if we look at the Aharya Abhinaya, the costuming as well as the leg movements, the way the leg is kept like this, and it's very beautiful how there is a blend that is happening, right? And then we look at the interplay of cultures. So there is a Muslim Tayyam, or a Mapala Chamundi Tayyam, which is prominent in the prominent in northern Kerala, wherein both the Chamundi, the Devi, and the Imam, that he's the Imam figure, the Muslim leader figure, who are actually dressed up as Tayyam, and they go around blessing people. And the story was like, I know there are multiple stories, but stories are equally important to these performing arts and the continuation of these art forms, so to speak. So what happens is that there is this imam, and he has gone to fish in a pond, and he sees a light across the bank of that pond, and he swims to that place. Uh, but then he swims to that place thinking that, there is something. But then as soon as he reaches across, he sees that that particular light has shifted to the place where he was initially standing, right? And while he's coming back, he's dragged into a whirlpool. And eventually, what happens is, it is believed that he becomes one with the Chamundi Devi of that particular region, and both the Imam and Chamundi are worshipped together uh, by the devotees of that region. And it is very dramatic, where the Imam actually does his namaz, and then there is a battle scene, and then they come together, and then they bless the people. So this very beautiful interplay of cultures that we see. Uh, with regard to language, Urban Butta it makes use of Arabic, Persian, and Malayalam in its renditions. Right? There are not many other influences that we see, but definitely the influence of language here. Then we have Chavitanadagam that emerged after Vasco da Gama's visit to Kerala, right? And it is called Chavitanadagam, and Chavittu means stamping, right? And that's interesting, because the stamp is actually it's very, I wouldn't say that it is entirely taken from, say, the classical arts or other art forms, but there is some sort of a resemblance, the way the legs are placed, the kind of the footwork that is happening is slightly similar, though the Abhinaya, the costuming and everything is way different. The stories are Christian stories. They are biblical stories. They are stories of the Christian heroes. Also, the other point is that the chenda is used as as part of the musical orchestra, right? And also there is Margam Kali, which is based on the Nanaya songs. So these Nanaya songs have influences of Old Malayalam, Tamil, and Syriac. But especially in Margam Kali, for example, the way they place their finger on their right side, and on the left hand, the way it is placed, it's a very common hand gesture. It's a very common mudra that we see across other art forms, not just Kerala art forms, but other art forms as well. And we see that in sculptures too. So there is definitely an influence, I would say, in the way it is placed. So maybe it is not as flowy as we see in the other last year performing arts, but it is very geometric in nature. But nevertheless, there is this kind of influence that I would like to talk about. So I come to the end of this lecture, and what I would like to conclude is that, what say Sheldon Pollock says in Cosmopolitan and Vernacular in History, where he says that languages are, so he talks about he talks in the context of language. He says that there might be a vernacular, and then there is a codification that is happening, and then again there is a vernacular that is emerging, right? And so there is always this convergence and divergence that is happening. There's always this interaction that is going on, right? And so the same thing is happening in the context of performing arts in Kerala, right? There is we do not know when a particular performing art began, where it emerged. We are not quite sure about the dates, but what we are sure about is that there is always an interplay. There is always this confluence that is constantly happening, right? And who are we? And when I was telling you about looking at nomenclatures, um, so A.K. Ramanujan, when he's talking about folklore, right, he says that there is something called a fixed entity and there is something called a fluid entity, right? And we never know what is fixed and what is fluid, right? And what is oral and what is written. I mean, we can definitely say that what is oral and written, but we can never classify them as something like classical or something like folk. What we can do is to understand, and he gives this very beautiful example of a Kathakali script. He says that the Kathakali script, maybe it is only written in 4 to 5 pages, but the entire production of the play, the entire performance of the play will take about a night or several nights to be completed, right? So it's about improvisation. It's about, and if we see that in music as well, that a particular line is improvised and it is sung in several different ways, to and we have an audience that enjoys that, right? And that's the beauty of it, that there is this constant change. There is this uniqueness that each performing art has, but there is always this constant change, and there is always this constant dialogue that is happening. And so to say something, to say that one is classical, the other is folk, or to keep them in hierarchies, is something that we should refrain from. And as an end note, I would just say that the bottom line would be to say that this very interplay and this very interaction and confluence is the reason why the performing art scene of Kerala is so rich and colorful. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.